Let's start with NDG Westmount. We
Yeah.
were talking about the lack of a proper debate, so the Liberals and Conservatives not showing up to the NDG debate, the Westmount debate, cancelled due to some organizational issues. First, how unusual is it for a by-election to not have a proper debate which doesn't feature the front runner, the member, the party governing, as well as the official opposition? How often does that happen?
It's incredibly rare, and if you're asking people for the confidence, their vote, then the least you can do is show a little bit of respect back and show up in debate and not be afraid to talk. I mean, if you're going to Parliament, you better be able to speak and to debate and to stand your ground. And if you're too afraid to show up even in your own riding, come on. I think that the Liberals believe that they've got this, which would make a lot of sense given past performance of the Liberals in NDG Westmount with Mark Garneau. But, I don't know about you, Dan, and I've been listening to the show for weeks on CJAD. Now that the Senate has adopted C-13, not even made the slightest effort to listen to the things that experts like, Joan Fraser was one of them, but you had lots of legal experts as well saying, look, be super careful. This is going to remove rights of the English-speaking community of Quebec. So is this echo chamber stuff? Is this stuff for experts, and are people who are just used to voting Liberal going to go out and vote Liberal again? Remains to be seen. I think that Anna Gainey has lots of qualities. If you look at her CV, she's been a senior person in the Liberal Party for years. But at the same time, how can you want to represent people if you won't even talk to them?
Well, Tom, Justine McIntyre here, it's very interesting to hear you say that, because that's essentially what Dan and I have been saying throughout the show today. And we've heard from callers as well. We've invited callers to speak with us about people living in NDG Westmount, to speak with us about their perspective on this by-election. And many of them have actually brought up Bill C-13 as being a major issue for them and something that may actually decide the vote. Many former people who formerly readily voted for the Liberal Party are now saying that they will not as a result of C-13. What's your take on that?
I've been getting that a lot as well,
Okay.
Justine.
Yeah.
And some people are just saying, I'm not even going to bother to go and vote, which is a shame. I think that you should go and vote. We're lucky to live in a democracy. But if you're really upset about C-13, the interesting thing about a by-election is that it's an opportunity to send a message.
Right.
And it's not a long-term thing. It's you're not sending somebody there for the full 4 years. It's for a shorter term. So you have a little bit more flexibility, and you can stand your ground and say, look, I'm so upset with what the Liberals have done, and Trudeau didn't show any interest in it whatsoever, and Anna Gainey won't even talk about it. What I find fascinating is that the Conservatives appear to be afraid of their own shadow. I go back to the leadership campaign. Poilievre talked a good game, about Bill 21, but at the beginning of the campaign, he stood foursquare in favor of Bill 21. Only when it became clear that his support of Bill 21 would cost the Conservatives any hope of getting a seat in the Greater Toronto area did he change his tune. But what's their position on Bill 96? What's the Conservative position on C-13? They voted for it, so is that their position? They think that the English-speaking community of Quebec can just be sacrificed like that, and we're not supposed to have any reaction to it? Well, again, they wind up in the same position as the Liberals in that case.
At the same time, you mentioned that it's an opportunity to send a message. At the same time, we know that by-elections tend to inspire a much lower voter turnout.
Yeah.
So it's always more difficult to enact change in that situation, because what ends up happening when you have a lower voter turnout is that you end up having the parties that have the best mechanism for getting out the vote who end up...
The best machinery.
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
You're completely right, but they do produce surprises sometimes.
Yep.
I managed to take the Liberal stronghold of Outremont in a by-election. I don't think I would have ever gotten it in a general to begin with.
Excellent illustration.
I went on and won it 3 times in 3 general elections in a row after that. But you got to get your foot in the door. And I was, no question, I was a message. I mean, there was a community there that was extremely upset. The Liberal candidate had basically said, well, no problem with Hamas. They're legally elected and that sort of thing. And that didn't go over great with a large part of the community there.
Wait, I don't remember that one. Which Liberal candidate was that?
That was Jocelyn Coulon,
okay,
who had written that, and who was the Liberal candidate, and the person chosen by Stéphane Dion to be the Liberal candidate. So he tried to back out of it, but once, it's the old story,
Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Right, things that are in writing stay.
That's right.
And in terms of the electorate there in NDG Westmount, I do also seem to remember Mark Garneau having a close election against the NDP in one race, right? So it is maybe theoretically possible.
So close that he conceded. And that was in the 2011 Orange Wave.
Yeah.
But the Liberals have always been brilliant at getting out the early vote. And I think that that's what they've been working on again. They have their lists, what we call, they use the French word often, the pointage, simply the lists of voter identification. So you go to the people you've already identified as Liberals, you offer to drive them or to carry them on your shoulders. It doesn't matter. You're going to get them to the polling station come hell or high water, and that's where the Liberals are probably going to be able to pull it off. But like your listeners, like the folks that write to me, like the people that I've been talking to, they are so upset. I think that there might at least be a strong message to the Liberals here. I'm not sure it's ever going to be able to be enough to turn the tide, but I've spoken to very few people who will admit that they're going to be voting Liberal.
I asked Tom, my mother-in-law, who is a Pierre Poilievre supporter, what issue she wanted to bring up on the program today, and she said the Bernardo prison transfer move, and Marco Mendicino offering no answers. He didn't know and nothing, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything.
Yeah. And you can tell your mother-in-law, or was it your grandmother or your mother-in-law?
Mother-in-law, yeah.
Mother-in-law. You can tell your mother-in-law that Tom Mulcair agrees with Pierre Poilievre on this issue, that Mendicino should step down. It's just not plausible. And even if we believe the implausible, so his argument is, I got so upset with my staff. Boy, they better learn how to tell me important stuff and, move it up the chain of command. This is what we've been listening to for months in Ottawa. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, no, but I sent you the memo. Oh, I didn't read it. I was so busy doing other stuff. So nobody knew anything about Chinese government interference. Nobody knew that Paul Bernardo was going to be moved, except everybody knew. The Prime Minister's office knew, the Minister's office knew, everybody knew, but they kept forgetting to tell the boss. This is why Mendicino has no credibility when he talks about this, because we're not talking about some vague, bureaucrat sitting on the 15th floor of an office building in Gatineau. We're talking about his own political staff, the people he chose to be around him, and he's going huffing and puffing and saying, well, I've read them the Riot Act. Boy, oh boy, they better not mess up like that again. It's got zero credibility.
When in doubt, blame the millennials.
Well, they even started putting out, this one really made me laugh, because they even started putting out, his staff is so young, they had never heard of Paul Bernardo.
Oh, no.
They knew nothing about it.
Oh, boy. Tom, can we get in one more quick topic, perhaps? The Supreme Court of Canada upholding the Safe Third Country Agreement. So we're talking about, of course, the agreement that stipulates that anyone making a claim, an asylum seeker, in the first country that they arrive in, that's where their claim should be processed. Now, that's been upheld.
That's a really good summary, Justine. Yes. So that's been upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court. And this has not been a Supreme Court that is unanimous that often. So it's been interesting to see. So this is something that progressive Canadians have been worried about for some time, especially when Trump was there, and that's when these cases were being put together. How can you tell somebody who's finally made it to Canada that, no, it's supposed to be safe in the United States, go back? That's how Roxham Road, by the way, started, because the minute you show up at a legitimate border crossing, like you go to Lacal, you're going to be turned back. So then people started going through Roxham Road, and then they had to patch that up as well. So the Supreme Court is saying, no, this is absolutely fine. These are two countries that respect the rule of law and the international order, and it's fine to have this deal between Canada and the U.S. So all those groups that have been pushing so hard for years, again, mostly when we were going through the trauma of having Trump there, and so many people were trying to get out because they knew they were going to get thrown out. I think that it came as a bit of a surprise, frankly, to see the unanimity of the Supreme Court. But then there's no more ambiguity about it. Nobody's going to be pleading this again.
This could be a problem for refugees, though. I mean, there are cases where there could be mistakes made, and maybe one country messes up, and maybe it falls to the other country to do the right thing.
Right, and so this is the weird thing about the rules that Biden and Trudeau came up with recently during Biden's visit to Ottawa, because if you manage to make it over the Canadian border and you're here for a couple of months, then you can make your claim they're not going to send you back to the States. But if they nab you at the Roxham Roads of this world, they'll turn you back right away the same way they would have at a legitimate border station before.
I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I just want to, and I've said this last time on the immigration issue, if we don't become realistic about the migration that's happening all over the world, we're going to start seeing kind of dystopian scenes in Canada like we see in California, where we have the lineups at Home Depot at 6 a.m. for all the illegal workers just desperate for work. I would predict that if we keep on the status quo here, that's precisely what we'll see in Canada soon.
Yeah, and of course there are the classic causes, political instability, so many dictatorships and frankly just abject poverty. People are willing to walk with their kids across Mexico from their Central American country to try to get to the Texas border and try to somehow pray to get across the border. But I'd add to that, we're going to see more and more mass migration because of climate change.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you visit a country like Indonesia, you go from Jakarta to the airport, it's like a pool table. It's flat, and it's sea level, and you're in a place like Bangladesh, and the rising seas are going to cause, and the lack of water in some areas, and too much rain and flooding in others, is going to cause massive disruption and huge transfers. Just the one war in Syria, brought millions of people across Europe. Some countries were more generous than others. Sweden has a population of 8 million, and they took in 1 million Syrian refugees. So it still exists, to have countries that are doing everything they can to help the people who are, like you say, the people who are in the greatest difficulty around the world. But right now, it's more and more closed, and the Trump view of the world is shared. If you go to Hungary or if you certain other countries, even in the European Union, they're very closed to the idea of letting people in.
Thanks, Mr. Mulcair. Have a good weekend.